In a world where a woman's power was her obedience, one dared to say no to a king. She was beautiful, clever, and dangerously ambitious. She wasn't born a princess, but she would die a queen. Her name was Anne Boleyn. And her story is not just a romance, it's the story of a revolution that began with a single look and ended with a sword. This is the tale of how a courtier's daughter changed England forever, and how the same love that crowned her would ultimately demand her head. We begin in the early 1500s. England is a powerful and deeply Catholic nation, ruled by the formidable King Henry VIII. For over 20 years, he has been married to Queen Catherine of Aragon, a respected Spanish princess. But there is a shadow hanging over the throne. Despite numerous pregnancies, Catherine has failed to produce a male heir, leaving only one surviving child, a daughter named Mary. For a king obsessed with his dynasty, this was a crisis. Henry needed a son, and his eyes began to wander. And that's when he saw her, Anne Boleyn. She wasn't royalty. She was a lady-in-waiting to the queen, the daughter of a courtier. But Anne was unlike anyone Henry had ever met. Fresh from the sophisticated courts of Europe, she was educated, witty, and possessed a captivating, almost defiant, charm. While other women at court would have done anything to become the king's mistress, Anne did the unthinkable. When Henry tried to seduce her, she refused. That single word lit a fire in the king. He was utterly obsessed. He showered her with letters, gifts, and promises of titles. He was the most powerful man in England, used to getting everything he wanted. But Anne held firm. She made her position crystal clear. She would be his wife, his queen, or she would be nothing to him at all. She would never be his mistress. In that moment of defiance, Anne Boleyn set in motion the most dangerous and transformative love story in English history. She wasn't just playing for the king's heart. She was playing for the throne itself. But there was one colossal obstacle. Henry was already married. In the eyes of the Catholic Church, marriage was a sacred sacrament, and divorce was strictly forbidden. The only person who could grant an annulment was the Pope himself, and he flatly refused. Queen Catherine's nephew was the Holy Roman Emperor, a man the Pope could not afford to offend. But Henry VIII was not a man who took no for an answer, especially not from a king and a pope. Fueled by a potent mix of lust for Anne, desperation for a son, and a massive royal ego, he did something no English king had ever dared. He decided that if the church wouldn't give him what he wanted, he would simply get rid of the church. Henry broke away from centuries of tradition and papal authority. He declared himself the supreme head of a new Church of England. This cataclysmic event, known as the English Reformation, shattered the religious landscape of Europe. Monasteries were dissolved, and England's ties to Rome were severed forever. And it all started because the king wanted a new wife. In 1533, with his new power, Henry had his marriage to Catherine declared void and secretly married the now pregnant Anne Boleyn. She had won. The courtier's daughter who said no was crowned Queen of England in a magnificent ceremony, glittering with jewels and triumph. She had achieved the impossible. She had made a king remake a nation just to have her. Later that year, the moment of truth arrived. Anne gave birth. But it wasn't the son Henry had gambled his kingdom for, it was a daughter. They named her Elizabeth. Henry was deeply disappointed. The kingdom held its breath. Little did they know, this baby girl would grow up to become one of England's greatest and most iconic rulers. Queen Elizabeth I. But in that moment, for Anne, the birth of a daughter was the first crack in her crown. The clock had started ticking. Anne's sharp wit and ambition had won her the throne. But they also made her powerful enemies. The courtiers she had outmaneuvered whispered behind her back, eager for revenge. The public, who had loved the devout Queen Catherine, saw Anne as a usurper, a heretic. And most dangerously of all, the king's passionate obsession began to cool. The fiery love that had burned so brightly was now flickering. Anne suffered several devastating miscarriages. Then, in early 1536, she miscarried a baby that was, by all accounts, a boy. For Henry, this was the final straw. His patience, and his love, snapped. His gaze had already drifted to a new, quieter lady-in-waiting, Jane Seymour. He had torn his kingdom apart for Anne, and she had failed him. He decided she had to go. What followed was a swift and brutal campaign to destroy her. The king's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, constructed a web of monstrous lies. Anne was accused of adultery with multiple men, including her own brother. The charges were outrageous, a blatant fiction designed for one purpose: to get her out of the way. In Henry's court, where the king's will was law, the truth no longer mattered. Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The same fortress she had departed from in triumph, on the day of her coronation, was now her prison. From a queen to a condemned woman, in the blink of an eye. She waited there, knowing her fate was sealed. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn walked with calm dignity to the execution scaffold. She wore a simple grey gown, her famous dark hair tucked beneath a white coif. The crowd watched in stunned silence. She didn't scream or protest her innocence. Instead, her final words were a masterclass in queenly grace. She spoke softly, urging the people to pray for the king, calling him a gentler, nor more merciful prince. She knelt on the wooden platform, whispered a final prayer. To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Henry, in a final, strange act of mercy, had hired an expert swordsman from France to ensure the end would be swift. With one clean stroke, it was over. The queen who had defied Rome, redefined the monarchy, and changed the course of history, was gone. The crowd stood in silent shock. A queen of England had been executed on the orders of her husband. The next day, Henry married Jane Seymour. Anne Boleyn's reign lasted only 1,000 days, but her legacy is eternal. She was a woman who dared to want more, to reach for power in a man's world. She was brilliant, flawed, and ultimately unforgettable. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would rule for over 40 years, securing the Protestant faith her mother had been martyred for. The untouchable woman was gone, but the world she created had just begun. Thank you for watching. If you were fascinated by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more dives into the most dramatic moments in history.